Hello and welcome to NJ Biz Conversations. I'm your host, Jeff Kanige. My guest today is David Blanchett. He is the head of retirement research at Prudential Financial and a portfolio manager at PGIM, Pru's investment management business. David, welcome.
Great to be here.
Thanks for joining me. I was interested in talking to you today for a couple of reasons. The main one being the release of Prudential's 2025 Global Retirement Pulse Survey. The other one being is that I'm at an age when retirement is sort of a major topic of consideration. But mainly this is the survey, which explored the attitudes of what Pru calls the mass affluent, those with more than $100,000 in investment assets, if I'm explaining this correctly. And the main findings, if I recall correctly, are that while most are confident about their ability to retire, there are some caveats to that. Fewer than half have a financial advisor, only about a third have a written plan, half or fewer are considering the effects of costs like inflation, healthcare, and medical expenses, and just a quarter have a clear withdrawal strategy. So the first obvious question is, what do those findings mean to you? Is the confidence that people express misplaced because they don't have those things?
I would say yes and no. I think first, as you noted, the survey focuses on mass affluent. We actually focused on 4 different countries. For our conversation, we'll just focus on the US. And these are defined again as folks that have more $100,000 or more saved for retirement. And so, like, why that's important, right? Is some Americans don't have a lot saved for retirement. So we just sort of want to focus on, okay, those that have put something away, like, how are they feeling? And it was this kind of confidence paradox, right? Whereas you note a lot of individuals are actually pretty confident when it comes to covering, especially their essential expenses. But we're not always sure where that confidence is coming from because a lot of folks don't have an advisor. You could argue that they haven't saved enough. And I think that if I look at my separate body of research, retirees do tend to figure things out. There kind of is this paradox where you wouldn't necessarily expect these folks to be as confident as they are,
Right.
but they're pretty optimistic.
Okay, and it just occurred to me as you're talking that with $100,000, if that's the minimum, those folks with $100,000 saved, they're probably fairly early in the process. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, so it includes people
Characterization?
between the ages of, I think, 35 and 65. And so I
Okay,
think that, $100,000, actually, it isn't that much saved for retirement if you're
right.
60.
That's what I'm thinking. Yes.
Yeah, but it is a lot more for those who are younger. So there is
Okay.
this kind of, interesting effect where this isn't all Americans. These are folks who are preparing, but it probably kind of better aligns to your listeners that are thinking about retirement, are doing things that kind of proactively achieve a good outcome.
Okay, so let's talk about a couple of these things. First of all, a financial advisor. Why is that important? I mean, I imagine a lot of folks are concerned about a couple of things. Number one, the cost, and number two, finding someone they can trust.
Yep.
What what would you tell those people who are saying, okay, I get it. Maybe I need someone to talk to, but boy, A, how do I find someone, and B, how do I afford it?
Yeah, I think that if we think about where financial advice generates the most value.
Hmm.
In my experience, it tends to be before and around retirement, right?
Okay.
I think that most Americans would benefit from a financial advisor. Now, you can do this yourself. I mean, in theory, you can go online. There's Chat GPT, there's all these tools that you can use to figure things out. But retirement requires a lot of, like, really important decisions, like, when do I claim Social Security? Can I afford to retire? How long am I going to live? All these different things. And so I think that one thing I always say is that if you've never gotten a financial plan, get at least one before you retire. Right?
Okay.
If you have a financial advisor, maybe even get a second opinion, right?
Mhm.
Because what you don't want to do is get things wrong, right? You don't want to not have enough saved, quit your job, and then not find a new one, right? So I think that advice can be expensive. It's hard to know who to trust,
Mhm.
but the value of financial advice can be significant, especially for retirees.
Okay. Well, that you sort of raised the next question I was going to ask was if you haven't been working, if say you're thinking about retiring within a year, say, or
Yep.
less than that, and you haven't been working with someone, does it still make sense to find someone at this point, and can that person still help?
I mean, like, there's a wide spectrum today of what it means to be a financial advisor, right? If you're not interested in engaging someone that's going to charge you, an ongoing retainer or percentage of assets, there's lots of advisors that just do hourly financial planning fees. You can pay
Okay.
them to put together a plan, right? You can do some of that even online. There's a growing spectrum of online tools that you can use. But I think, like, the key is just having kind of a second or even third set of eyes, just making sure that you're in a good spot because you like it, and that is like mission critical. You don't want to make a mistake. I say that
Okay.
again, like advice is valuable throughout your lifetime, but if you invest in a target date fund and you save 15%, you have life insurance, do all these things in accumulation, probably going to be okay. It's harder to apply those rules of thumb in retirement just because we're all so different.
Right. Okay. And you mentioned a plan and writing a plan. That was the next thing I wanted to ask you about. Is first of all, who should write the plan? Should someone do it themselves, or should, as you sort of alluded to just now, have the financial advisor do it?
So I
Who
mean, I think
puts
it's
that
like
together?
I've just seen a spectrum for my entire life. I used to be a financial advisor if we go back 2 decades, right? And I think that there are lots of people who are more than competent to kind of figure these things out on their own, right? They
Okay.
like doing it. They like, going online and finding references and asking hard questions. Other folks want no part of it. They want to know that someone else is managing their portfolio for them, someone that's giving them advice about how much they can spend, and all these other things. So I think that it really depends upon like who you are as a person. But I think like one point that I make is like you can make a mistake. You can invest poorly or do things wrong when you're 45, and it might cost you money, but you've got time to fix things. When you get to retirement, the costs of mistakes can be significant. And so I think like that's where having that kind of trusted advice, that second opinion, that's where it becomes just more valuable. So again, I understand there's skepticism. There's lots of reasons why some folks don't want to have advisors, but even just engaging someone to build an hourly plan and get honest assessment or feedback, I think that can be really valuable.
Okay. So what would go into a written plan? Is it what you're planning for before you retire, or what you're going to do once you do retire, and how you handle the savings that you've accumulated?
Well, I mean, it's realistically like at what age can you retire given a
Okay.
spending goal? How much do you need to be saving? Like, how long do you need to plan for? What is an appropriate risk level? Again, like the aspects of this that planners help with vary significantly, but it really just kind of is like how does your overall economic situation for retirement look?
Okay. So if you're thinking about retiring at age 65 and you're in your early 60s, now that would be the time to sort of put that together, is what I'm hearing you saying, because we want to know whether that's a reasonable target date.
So I would prefer it be before early 60s,
Okay.
I would say. Because I mean, so one really important thing that we need to be aware of is that most Americans ish plan on retiring at 65. People retire 3 years early on average, right? At
Right.
62. Like, there's this been consistent effect over the last 3 decades where people, target a certain age and they retire early. And most of those retirements that are early aren't by choice. It's you
Mm,
get laid off, you have a
right.
health issue, your spouse does. And so I think like why it's important is like if you're someone who's behind and you say, hey, I'm like 60, I'm gonna start saving tons of money for retirement, and then something happens, then you're in trouble. So I think just the longer you have to kind of understand what are your options, what are the implications of maybe early retirement, the more time you have to figure things out and adjust as you
Sure.
need to.
Okay, well that makes perfect sense. Yeah. All right. Now the survey also, and correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe I was misreading it, seemed to pick up some skepticism about the future of retirement and what it would look like. Do you have a sense for what folks are facing, and is it going to be harder for people now? Let's say folks who in their 40s or 50s, is it going to be much harder for them to retire than it was for people who are in their 60s, 70s, and are either about to retire or already retired?
So I think it is getting harder for a few reasons. One, we have more Americans are saving for themselves in
Right.
defined contribution plans, right? And I think that like 401ks, 403bs, like these are the retirement saving vehicles of the future. There's no denying that. Okay. The problem though is when you get to retirement, you have this big pot of money. You don't know how long you're going to live. Right.
Right.
And so when you combine this movement towards 401k plans to increasing uncertain longevity, it makes it really hard to know how
Yeah.
much you can spend, like how
Mm.
you should invest in all these things. And so I think that there are things that you can do in retirement, kind of simplify things like delaying claim of Social Security, write a lifetime income annuity. But I do think retirement is becoming more and more complicated as more of these decisions are being placed on individual retirees, and we just don't know what's going to happen,
Yeah.
right?
Okay. Okay. You mentioned earlier that the survey also had some respondents from other countries. I think it was Japan, Brazil, and Mexico. And
Mhm.
I'm curious about whether attitudes are different across in different countries. I'm thinking especially for countries like Japan or others, where there is a more robust social safety net than we have in the United States. Do they have a different a different expectation? Does that shape their expectations or their plans for how they're going to retire?
So people are pretty optimistic all over the
Oh,
globe.
really? Okay.
Okay? But I think that, like, to your point about social safety nets, I mean, like, our social security system is actually relatively generous compared to most other developed countries.
Okay.
Most other countries view it as a means to kind of not eradicate, but like minimize the possibility of like poverty and old age,
Hmm.
right? It's intended to kind of ensure that older Americans aren't in poverty. Our system, though, I mean, you could easily have benefits that exceed $100,000 for a married couple that have been making high wages their entire life. So that is not poverty eradication. Like that's
Right.
that's a means to create lifetime income. So I think
Right.
that, on one hand, we have a very generous social security system. On the other, though, we have all this uncertainty around the trust fund, its depletion, what will happen in 8 to 10 years. And I think that is definitely creating some concerns among Americans, just given
Hmm.
how much we see that in the headlines today.
Okay. And we keep coming back to this uncertainty. So I'm curious as to whether you've picked up either in your research or in talks with clients about how people are viewing the economy as we go forward here. As there is, I mean, just in talking to business owners, business executives, there's been a lot of uncertainty over the last 12 months because of what's happening in Washington and new administration here in Trenton. Um, are, are folks really concerned about whether the economy is going to affect their plans negatively or adversely?
I mean, I think people have different perspectives on what the economy will do for their retirement plans. I guess my concern is just that the markets have been very strong the last 10 or 15 years,
Right.
unusually strong,
Mhm.
right? And it's unlikely that we have these periods of robust outperformance versus historical averages or near them, where we don't then see periods of negative or low returns. And so, I do hope the markets go up forever. That would just be
Right.
spectacular for all of us. They just keep going up forever. But that's just not what we've seen historically. So I guess my concern is that no one knows when it'll happen, but if we have a correction, it could be a significant event because,
Right.
for those listeners that know, like, there's this idea of sequence risk, which is just the returns when you first retire are the most impactful on retirement outcomes. Yeah, sorry, but
That's okay. Uh, and well, that's a good question because those of us who lived through the financial crisis and had no interest whatsoever in looking at our 401k statements during that period are probably a little bit have to be a little bit worried about what might happen to the markets going forward.
right, and we don't know what's going to happen. Right? I
Right.
think that to me is the issue where if we do experience, 3 to 5 years of negative returns, that would devastate people who are about to or just retire.
Okay. Right. So you mentioned Social Security. Where does that fit in? Are folks counting on Social Security to be there? And is that a part of what they're planning for? As you mentioned, for a married couple with high wages, that could be a pretty significant chunk of money that's coming in. Does that are folks? I mean, I think most people believe it's going to be there, but that's not certain. And so again, another bit of uncertainty. How should you plan for what's going to happen with Social Security?
Yeah, I think it'll definitely be there. If you look at projections, right, there's the trust fund, and if the trust fund is depleted, you only get about 80% of the benefits from current wages and current taxes. And so theoretic, let me get some more water.
It's okay. I'll do
So theoretically, it is possible for a benefit cut. I think that's highly unlikely because older Americans vote.
Right.
I think the last thing that we would as a country be okay with is cutting existing benefits. And so
Hmm.
I think where Social Security is more of a question mark is what'll it be when I retire in 20 years?
Hmm.
So I feel like near and current retirees should be okay. Longer term though, for the program to be economically stable, I feel like we have to make changes. Now the changes could just be increasing taxes. But realistically, some combination of increasing taxes and reducing benefits is likely the best path towards long-term stability.
Okay. And the fact is, I think you're right. Politically, I think most people have in their head that if I'm already retired or if I'm going to retire soon, I've been paying into this system for my entire adult life. It better be there. And you would think, and I'm curious as to whether you think this, that I think most people think politicians will not do that, will not impose that kind a bait and switch on most people.
Any politician I think that does that will no longer be a politician.
Right.
I think we can all acknowledge that there are just certain aspects of our society that would be really really difficult. I mean, I think again, like taking a step back, like we have to make changes,
Mhm.
right? We've got a radical shift in our demographics as a country. You
Right.
know, thinking about workers supporting Social Security, it's gone down from like 10-ish back in the day to like less than 3 right now. So we can't like the current system isn't going to work unless we make changes. That being said, I don't think anyone wants to cut grandma's Social
Right.
Security benefit. So I think that there are hard choices to be made. I wish we would address those sooner versus later because the longer it takes us to do that, the more pain we're going to have to feel. But I just think it's highly unlikely that
Right.
that current or even folks within say 5 or 10 years of retirement will be affected by whatever they do to the system.
Okay. And one last thing on Social Security. The New York Times did a piece a few weeks ago. You were quoted fairly extensively in about when you should start taking Social Security.
Yeah.
My takeaway from that was that, obviously everybody's situation is different, but if you can wait, it's better. Is that where you came down on this? Is that
I think like there are very few things that a lot of us that research retirement agree on. And, I mean, we have to kind of acknowledge two existing things. The first is like that you actually have enough money to figure out when you're going to claim. For better or worse, most Americans don't have that. They've got to claim as soon as they retire. That's just how things are. Okay.
right?
So if you have a pot of money, right, and you're in reasonable health, odds are you're going to be better off delay claiming. Now, I think one reason people, you know, don't like to delay is to your earlier point, like they've been working for 30 or 40 years and they want the benefit. I think we need to like change the mindset. Like don't view like age 62 as like the early claiming age. View it as like the maximum penalty age. Right.
Mhm.
That is where your benefit is the smallest because you claim the earliest. And just based upon kind of some of the math, like it's highly unlikely that if you are in good health, right, and you can afford to do so, that claiming early is going to result in more wealth over your lifetime. So, I'm not saying that everyone has to wait till age 70, but at
Right.
least wait to maybe the full retirement age 67 or older if you can, because it really is a great deal.
Right. And that's the case even though you're not paying into the system. If you retire and you're not paying into the system anymore,
Right.
it's still
If you keep paying in, technically, like it could increase your benefit because your benefit is based upon the highest
right.
35 years of your. But to me, the key is that like view it as. I mean, it's not an investment, but it's kind of like an inflation-linked government bond that you can buy that has very, very attractive interest rates. There's nothing else like it, right? It's tax advantage. It's linked to inflation explicitly. There's spousal survivor benefits. So it really is this fantastic benefit for retirees. And I just don't think that claiming early really is in the best interest of the folks that really can't afford to wait.
Okay. So finally, before I let you go, then a piece of advice. The best piece of advice, I guess, is to start saving as early as
Sure.
possible. The second most important piece of advice: get an advisor. Is that
It really is. I mean, people ask me like what to do. Like, I mean, again, I get it. I'm sure that most people listening have an advisor, or a lot of folks listening. For those that don't, I realize there's a lot of distrust out there.
Mhm.
But it's really important to have someone who is a professional in this industry. Be a second set of eyes just to sure you're on track. And again, like I'm not suggesting that you have to work with someone all throughout retirement, but just before you retire, like make sure you're in a decent spot because what you don't want to do is get something wrong, retire, and then have much worse or fewer choices about how you kind of correct your situation.
Okay. We will leave it there. That's a good spot for it. David Blanchett, the head of retirement research at Prudential Financial. Thank you very much. I appreciate you taking the time. It's all been
Good thing.
fascinating. And thank you for watching. Until next time, stay safe, everyone.